Hey everyone, welcome to the Leathercraft Junior Podcast Show. My name is Steve Van Plu. On today's episode, I'm sitting with an award-winning leather artist. She has an eclectic style of leather work that she has just mastered, and I cannot wait to introduce you to her and let you guys hear her story and all about who she is. She is the one and only Annie Libertini. Annie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stephen.
I want to start off, and I want to dabble in. I want people to know your background, a little bit about who you are and how did you get started doing artwork, and did you start it at a young age, or is this something you picked up as you got older?
I started at a very young age. I don't remember ever kind of not doing artwork. I was always drawing and painting and just making little things and making a mess always. But I was lucky because I loved doing it, and I was good at it from a pretty young age, so I got a lot of encouragement from the adults around me, and I just never stopped that momentum.
Gotcha. And then, did you go to school for art, or did you dabble on something else?
I went to undergrad for art. I got a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Painting from the Cleveland Institute of Art in Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, nice.
And I was also lucky there because a lot of my classmates had kind of sad stories about how not encouraged they were to attend art school by their families and people around them. But I was fortunate that my parents were very encouraging, and they were really behind me in kind of the goal. I think they always knew that that's where I was headed.
And then how did this translate into leathercraft now? Because I feel like this is going to be a simple jump for some people, but I want to know how did you get started in leathercraft? It
was strange because it was just completely by chance. They did not teach leather crafting at my school. I don't think anyone there had ever done it. It was just not on the radar of that program. And the only reason I ever tried it was because my roommate saw a picture of a leather mask somewhere that she wanted to make for Halloween, and she ordered some tools. In retrospect, I'm sure from a Tandy Leather. And she sort of ordered what she needed. She made her mask. She did a great job. And then she did what had happened a few other times, and it was why she was a really good roommate. She turned to me and said, "That was fun. I'm not going to do it again. Do you want these?" And I said, "Yes, I would love your free tools and supplies." And I tried them because I had them, so I had to try something. And she had made a mask, so I thought I will make a mask. And I kind of waited until one of those summers everyone else goes home and you're sort of alone. No one can see how it turns out. And I made an owl mask. And it was the first thing that I made, and I just didn't stop after that.
You still have that owl mask?
No. And I'm glad I don't, because it would look a lot less impressive to me now.
So you started with masks, and now you've evolved. Your mask making skills are through the roof. So they've been featured in TV shows and theater productions all over. Can you talk a little bit about your design process and how you go about making these masks?
It helps sort of as you make more of them. I think as with any kind of project, it gets easier because I have sort of a library of templates and designs that I've made. And at this point, it's easier for me to say, I want to make this, say, animal or bird. I do a lot of those. And I can go from the one that I have already that's sort of the closest and kind of piggyback on my own labor. But initially, there was a lot of back and forth with just learning things that now seem very obvious to me, but I didn't think about. I usually would pattern them in paper because you kind of have to just get a feel for how it looks in basic sense before you want to cut into your leather. And one of the things that I learned was I was originally using a plaster cast of my own face, because in art school, I think they always make you do that at some point. And I realized once I started making masks that I wanted maybe someone else to be able to wear, that you need to make sure that your face form is kind of big enough and has big enough features to be more representative. Mm-hmm. And I have a small face and a small nose, and it didn't really fit. It didn't fit anyone else. So it was things like that where I was like, oh, it has to fit right. Like if you're making them not for yourself, you have to make a lot more decisions. So I just kind of kept making them, and some turned out and some didn't. And, as you go, you just start to pick up your own ways of tackling certain kinds of design problems, I guess.
Are there any masks that you've made that off the top of your head that you can just think right now and be like, wow, that one challenged me, or this one really stands out because I really liked this topic or this theme? Anything like that you can think of that just really, you're like, ooh, I love doing those ones?
I think owls are always kind of my favorite. It was the first thing I made, and it's probably what I've made the most masks of. So there's so many different kinds, but you get kind of comfortable with how they come together. So it feels a little bit more organic to just be like, well, I'll try this owl, kind of move things around a little bit. And I made a bunch of owl masks for the TV show Gotham. And I cannot say I really enjoyed every moment of making them because I made 25-ish. And some of them I made when I was very pregnant. Some of them I made right after I had my daughter. The memories of those times weren't that great, but the satisfaction of having my own mask design that was just what I made to my own preferences, be able to be on something like that and have people see it, it was all worth it when I was finally able to get them sent out the door. But it's hard to make so many of the same thing all at once sometimes, especially on the kind of deadlines that TV has.
Yeah. Hey, y'all, I want to talk to you about the very first sponsor for the Leathercraft Community Podcast Show, and it is Leather Machine Company. If you are looking to upgrade your workshop or to speed up the process on making items, then look no further than Leather Machine Co. They have various sewing machines of multi-purpose needs, along with leather cutting and splitting machines. Check out their website or give them a call for more information. Now, let's go back to the show. Now that you've done masks, let's jump into portrait work. Mm-hmm. So your portraits are out of this world good. And I just want the audience to understand and get in the mindset of Annie of like, how do you go about starting a portrait?
The first thing is probably kind of obvious if you think about it, but you obviously need your reference. You need a picture of someone. And finding a good one for a leather portrait is important, because just because it's a beautiful photo doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate to a successful portrait. Mm-hmm. So you want something with good lighting, that you can really see everything in it. You want to make sure you have as much information in that photo as possible, because otherwise you're going to have to make some guesses, and you're just going to have to do a lot more work to make it happen. And just trying to make sure you have the best reference possible will set you up for success, because every step after that, from making the template to tooling it to coloring it, will be easier if you have just a good photo. No tiny, blurry, dark snapshots.
When you're making a leather portrait, what are some of those little things that when you see, like, oh, I got to make this person's grandmother or this historical figure, what are some of those difficult things that you face when you're like, ooh, this is going to be a little challenging? Is it like hair? Is it eyes?
Not eyes. Eyes are my favorite. So of any part of any portrait.
Why is that?
I've always loved drawing people. It was something I came to kind of early. So portraiture has been my favorite thing in pretty much any medium I've worked in. And it always just starts with the eyes, because you can just have eyes and still feel like you're getting a feel for the person behind them. But if the eyes don't work, it doesn't matter how great the rest of it is. It just won't have that vitality, that sort of sense of personality and life. But of course, that also means you really want to get them right.
Yeah.
Hair can definitely be challenging. Hair is a place where you most often have to make some sort of technical choices in terms of how to translate it into leather. If someone's hair is flying all over the place, you can't do every one of those strands. It's not going to work. So a lot of times that's where you have to decide, what am I going to simplify? How do I make the hair something that I can do in leather without making it look like it's I don't know, sprayed down hard with with hairspray, or make it look like it's not hair. Getting it to look natural and soft and real is really a challenge.
Hey everyone, our second sponsor for the Leathercraft Community Podcast Show is none other than the Leather Crafters Journal. Carrying on a tradition of 68 years of publishing the magazine for leather workers and artists worldwide, they also host 3 trade shows in the United States and 1 in Europe. Give them a call or visit their website and use the promo code COMMUNITY, and you will receive an additional free magazine added to your subscription at no charge. The Leather Crafters Journal truly sets the standard with staying up to date on all things leathercraft. If it's about leather, it's in the journal. Now, back to our show. In the first 3 magazines of the year 2020 for the Leather Crafters Journal, you did a 3-part series of how to do portraits. And it's like a nice progression of like, hey, this is what you should do. And it's great for somebody who's starting to do portraits or somebody who wants to. Now, do you have any other additional tips that you can give somebody who wants to do portrait work that is kind of like, ooh, this is going to be kind of hard?
I think the best thing that you can do is the stuff that you can do before you kind of come to a leather portrait, because you're going to set yourself up for success if you kind of get your eyes and your brain and your hands used to the contours and the shapes and the features of faces before you have the nerve-wracking process of doing it on leather. So the best thing that I think you can do, if you have a certain picture in mind, you would start with that. But even if you don't, if you just have some pictures of people with faces that are big enough that you could trace them, just sit there and just trace them. Don't think about the template. Don't worry about anything. Do it, for relaxing, like people who do coloring books. You don't need to think about your goal. Just sit in front of the TV and just trace the lines. And eventually you can start really narrowing down, like, what are the more important lines, because of course we have to make a template. Not everything goes on there. That's a challenge. But if you just start tracing, even if you don't feel like you're paying that much attention to what you're doing, you will be absorbing the angles, the curves, the proportions of faces. Also, if you do different faces, you will start to get a feel for what is always the same, like what contours are always there, and don't change much, which are kind of great because you always know, that's going to be there. I know what's going on there and what things are different in different kinds of faces. And you'll start to notice differences in, people's faces of different ages, of different, like all the differences you start to get. You're building a library inside your own mind of all those little things. And it makes it much easier when you come to a portrait because you're able to look at the details and say, oh, I know that. I know that one.
Yeah.
I've been here before, even if not in leather.
Let's talk about portrait size. Can you talk about the difficulties of a small versus a large, or are portraits typically like 5x7? Like, how does that go about sizing wise?
When you're thinking about doing a portrait and thinking about the size, in leather, we don't always have, you might not have a lot of choice, because if it's going on something, if it's going to go on a small, like a wallet or something small like that, it's going to be small. There's just only so big you can make it. But if you have any input on what the size is going to be, it helps to just make sure you're not picturing the whole portrait. You're picturing how big the face is going to be. And even more importantly, how big the eyes are going to be. Because if you think it might be getting too small, we're used to seeing photos in a very small size. We look at them on our phones. We see them in snapshots. We tend to forget how tiny that actually is. So when I'm trying to figure out if something is going to be too small, I think through how big are the eyes going to be. And I picture what tool I would be using to model those. And I try to visualize, like, can I even get into that space? Because at a certain point, you're going to hit a place where you have to really simplify faces. And of course, as the smaller it gets, the fewer details you include, but you have to be able to do them. And I think you want to kind of visualize yourself doing that portrait and try to imagine, like, how small are these? Or do a practice run if you have a little piece of leather to play with. I think the thing that people don't tend to expect is how much harder a big portrait is. We tend to think, oh, that's so small. That's going to be really tough to do, right? That's going to be a tiny tool. I'm not going to be able to see it very well. But it's almost harder when they get bigger sometimes. There's a point at which they get too small to be easy. It doesn't mean you can't figure it out, but you have to make some real changes. But there's also a point at which they get too big, because if you're doing a whole face and it is, I would say once the face starts to get more than like 5 inches, or maybe even 4 inches, kind of like maybe the height of the face, and it gets bigger than that, it can start to get difficult to make it look 3D because you only have so much depth there. And if the face starts to get big, and if the forehead is this big, how do you make that look like it's not flat when you're creating an illusion with only millimeters of depth? And eventually larger sizes, it's not the challenge of the small portrait where you're trying to get your hands in there and my tool's too big and it's too little. It's the challenge of, what do I do with this space without making it just look mushed and kind of overworked. So it can help to just try out things and try to figure out where your own limits are of your sort of sweet spot range of like, I prefer to not go any smaller than this, and I find it's better not to go any bigger than this, because there is definitely an easier range in there that I'm sure varies a little bit person to person.
Now let's talk about your 3D work. So you have quite a bit of amazing diorama 3D pieces. How do you go about deciding, like, I'm going to use an owl or someone's face coming out, and like, let's talk about that thought process of like attempting to do a 3D piece.
I think it was kind of a natural progression for me to go from making masks to making 3D work that was in other types of work, I guess, in like shadow boxes and things like that, because masks are 3D, but not fully, because you're not worrying about a backside. So the first shadow boxes I did, it was almost like it would sort of be creating a mask, but it would have eyes, or like it wouldn't have eye holes. It wasn't exactly, but the techniques were the same. And then I already would make 3D flowers and leaves and things like feathers and things like that I had made to go with my masks. So it made sense to start using those in different ways. With a 3D kind of a shadow box, you just have to decide where the furthest back portions are going to be and how far the furthest out portions are going to go, and then kind of map out your ranges in between, because it'll look more 3D if you have things that are kind of filling all those depths. You don't want it to just be the furthest back and some stuff sticking out to the front. Your eye will be kind of guided. It will make it look more 3D if you have sort of a range going through. So sometimes you just make a bunch of whatever it is, leaves, flowers. If you're putting it in a shadow box, however many you make, it could be thousands. It will not be enough, I guarantee. Because you start putting them in and you're like, I can still see the back. I can see the corner. But sometimes you just have to play with it. Just make some stuff and start sticking it in there and kind of visualizing what it's going to look like.
Yeah. In your shadow boxes, you have quite an eclectic array of paint and color.
Yeah.
And it makes everything just pop and looks awesome. Can you talk about how do you go about putting that kind of paint and like the depth and make it the realism pop out on paint onto leather?
I prefer using I use pretty much all water-based products because I work in my home in a spare bedroom, and it's just easier. And I like to use dyes for anything I can because the transparency is beautiful. You want to be able to see that leather.
Yep.
But of course, there are colors you can only get with paint. And we all know, you just do thin coats, not glob it on too much. But with 3D pieces, you can also kind of create extra depth by looking at, contrast changes, like as it goes back, because, in the distance, the contrast is lessened if you're looking at a landscape or anything like that. So you can play with, even creating lighting effects by making parts of it be physically more brightly lit in terms of color. And then it can help everything sort of fit together in a way that creates even more depth than what you've actually created.
Now, do you use a paintbrush or airbrush, or do you a combination of both?
Paintbrush.
Paintbrush only, huh?
Yeah, I love painting with a paintbrush. I understand airbrushes are amazing for so many things, but they just don't really work for me.
Gotcha. I see so many people using airbrushes, and it's just, I'm always like, I'm like blown away. I'm like, gosh, this is like
I'm impressed by what people can do with airbrushes.
yeah.
But that's not the fun part for me. I was a painting major at school. I love painting. I want that paintbrush. I want that. That's the connection.
Yeah.
For me, the airbrush just doesn't do that. But there are people out there for whom the airbrush is their instrument, and they're amazing at it.
Hey everyone, our newest sponsor for the Leathercraft Community Podcast Show is Milwaukee Steel Rule Dies. They specialize in manufacturing your leather designs into dies for your clicker machine. They have state-of-the-art equipment that will help you level up your Leathercraft products and production with clean-cut leather every single time. Family operated and owned, proudly made in Wisconsin. Contact Milwaukee Steel Rule Dies for all of your leather dye solutions. Talk about painting like a landscape. There are many difficulties on just using that many levels of hues and colors of going from front to back in the dimension of the landscape. How do you approach a project like that?
Landscapes are a really great way of kind of getting into the mechanics of color and contrast and all of that because what is a landscape if you don't feel the space? That is what it is there. You want the space, the light, the feel of a larger space in front of you. And you have to do some kind of very specific, tricky things with color to do that. So we all know that if you look at a photo of, a beautiful landscape with mountains in the distance, the mountains will usually look kind of blue because I think it's an optic effect of the air. I'm not really sure. But you can't just make them blue. It's all the colors get cooler as they go further back, but the contrast also goes down. So all the shadows get lighter, the range of contrast gets smaller. So you always want to make sure that as you go further back in the distance of a landscape, just have the contrast less and less. Make sure you've got your darkest shadows and your brightest highlights in the foreground. And also the warmer colors in the foreground. So, you get that blue distance look. But it's really sometimes the contrast that does it for you. And if you can do that, your eye is willing to follow that and say, I feel like there's a space there. It just needs a little help, signaling to your brain, like, look, there's distance.
Yeah. So you also teach. You do a lot of teaching. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about where do you teach and how can people take a class from you? And then also, what types of classes do you teach?
I teach both online and in person. Most of my in-person classes are at the leather trade shows. The next one I'll be teaching at is in Prescott. And I've taught a range. I've taught portraiture classes. I do a lot of three-dimensional flowers, things like that, which is kind of a sculpting class. And at the upcoming show in Prescott, I'm actually teaching a couple new classes, which is pretty exciting.
What are they?
One of them is I'm doing it with Jim Linnell, where it's a southwestern landscape, and he's doing the carving, the tooling portion, and then I'm doing the coloring portion.
Nice.
And which is exciting. And the other ones, I'm going to do a leather sculpting demonstration, which I'm excited about because I love doing 3D work. And the last one I'm really excited about, and it's a drawing class to sort of help your drawing skills, particularly aimed at people who want to improve their figure carving. Because especially for figure carving, how comfortable you are with just drawing can really make a difference into how well you can sort of put things on the leather. Because not only will it help you to understand the dimension that you're trying to create, it also gives you a leg up when you're starting to look at the coloring. Because you have a little background in the shadows and in the light, and even just things like where is the light source and how do you kind of keep track of that? How do you create the illusion of more dimension than you actually have? So as someone who's always just loved to draw, I'm really excited about that one.
And now let's talk about your online class, the ones that you teach.
Yep.
What are those, and where can they access those?
I'm not sure exactly how many, but quite a few online classes at ltrackstudio.com, and they are a combination of, there's a bunch of 3D flower classes. There's a ton of those on there. There are a few mask classes and quite a few like coloring and usually more figure carving, angled kind of classes too.
We have to transition to my favorite question of them all. I ask every person, and everybody knows. I want to know what your favorite leather tool or machine is that you use in your shop, and it could be anything that you personally like.
That's a hard one, because if I had to pick one tool, I guess that's, the one that if I could only have the one to work with, that's what I would want. And it would be a modeling spoon. I have a lot of modeling spoons. And you always have your favorites. But in terms of just my own feelings for a tool, I would have to say my favorite one is a handmade modeling tool that I was sent by a leatherworker named George Gross, and he does incredibly detailed work. He usually does fossils. He makes his own tools. They're incredibly small, finely detailed pieces, and he sent me this tool. And part of why I love it so much is not so much that I use it a lot, because it is incredibly tiny. It's almost scary for me, because he must use a magnifying glass. But how I got it was fun, because in, I think, 2019, on my birthday, just coincidentally, I received a big envelope from the Leathercrafters Journal, and I was like, oh, I don't think I ordered anything. And then, of course, for a second, I was like, well, it's my birthday. But I'm like, well, they don't know that. They're not sending me a birthday present. It just made it a little bit more confusing. And then I opened that up. Inside was another envelope with a sticky note from them saying, hey, this was sent to us to send on to you. I'm just like, well, this is just getting even more mysterious. And then inside that envelope was, I think, 2 others. It was quite it felt like a real birthday present opening experience. And what it was this tool and a letter from George Gross, because he had read my portraiture series in the journal. Actually, so I guess it must have been in 2020. And he had really enjoyed it. And he had this tool that was one of the first he'd ever made. And he's like, you do detailed work. I thought you'd find this interesting.
Awesome.
And he sent this lovely, he's very funny, this wonderful letter and this tool. And it was it meant so much to me, because he had read what I'd, put in the journal, and he'd liked it enough to go through a bit of a process to get this to me.
Yeah.
So I think if my studio was on fire, I could never replace that. I'd have to take it with me.
Grab it and run.
Yeah.
So as an independent leather artist, do you have any insight on how other leather artists can acquire commissions or other type of work, because you have such an eclectic array of skills? And what kind of tips could you give aspiring leather artists?
I think having a good online presence helps, which I'm not saying I'm horrible at updating my website, so I'm not really one to talk, but I think having just images of your work online is one of the easiest ways for people to find you, because a lot of the TV work that I've done, I'm pretty sure started as a reverse image, like as an image search for something. They were looking for something, and then they looked at a bunch of images and found mine, and then, they hunt you down. Mm-hmm. So being kind of findable in that way really helps. I think the hard thing about doing it on your own instead of being, say, an employee of a larger company is that it can get very difficult to keep up with everything. Everything comes down to you. The price is decided by you. If you lose track of something and you don't answer an email or you don't get back to someone, that is on only you. Yeah. And there's just so many things you have to think about. But I think the biggest thing is just if an opportunity comes, even if it's unexpected, which a lot of the things that I've done, I didn't go looking for it. It was just sort of like, can you do this? And it's, if you think you maybe can, just say yes and see what happens.
I think some of those unexpected jobs that come your way, they may not pay like what it should be worth, but I think it actually is beneficial because now your name is out there.
Yeah.
Do you know? And I think that it's almost like a domino effect where it leads to other people. They're like, hey, we know this girl named Annie that can do da da da.
Yeah.
And I think it's
they all build your reputation.
Yeah.
Of course, that's the joke, like in music too. It's just, you can play for the exposure. We don't need to pay you.
Yeah.
But there is a real element to that.
Yeah, there is.
And especially if it's something that's also interesting to you. Sometimes we do things for reasons other than just the money.
Correct.
The more of those kind of projects you do, the more you become confident that you can. That you can try that new thing and actually achieve it.
Yep.
You can say confidently, I haven't done that before, but I think I can figure it out.
Yeah. Well, Annie, let's wrap this up. How can people contact you if they want to get a hold of you to ask you questions, or if they want to put an order in for something like that, or if your books are even open, all that good jazz? How can someone contact you to get a hold of you?
The easiest way is probably email. My email's libertini.arts@gmail.com. You can also contact me through the website that I don't update enough. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and stuff, but email is usually probably the easiest way. I find things on social media tend to get lost.
Yeah, I agree, because it gets buried. So, well, Annie, thank you so much for telling your story, and hopefully the audience learned a little bit about portrait work, and hopefully they sign up for your classes.
Yeah, thank you.
So, all right, you guys, thank you so much for watching another episode of the Leathercraft Community Podcast Show. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.